Good evening. My name is John Godfrey, and I'm the Dean for International Education at the Rackham School of Graduate Studies. I'm pleased to welcome you to Rackham Auditorium on this October Eve. And on behalf of the members of the Wallenberg Committee, I would like to open the 14th Annual Wallenberg Lecture at the University of Michigan. This evening, we are delighted to honor Heinz Drossel, who has traveled from his home in Siemenswald, Germany, with his daughter Ruth, to receive the Wallenberg Medal and to speak with us about his experiences. And we also gather this evening to honor the memory of Raoul Wallenberg, a graduate of this university for whom this event is named. I would like to take a few minutes to talk with you about Raoul Wallenberg and to remind you of who he was and how he is connected to this place. Raoul Wallenberg was born into an accomplished and socially prominent Swedish family of bankers, diplomats, and politicians. In the 1920s, his youth unfolded within a world of wealth and privilege in a corner of Europe that had escaped the devastation of World War I. But Raoul's interests, even as a young man, lay beyond the comfortable circle of Stockholm's elite and pointed him outward toward the wider world. His family fostered in him honesty, compassion, and regard for others, and imbued in him an interest in the wider world and a commitment to purposeful activity. His family was determined not to spoil him. They raised him in an environment of books and learning and fed his acute and curious intellect. They gave him a boyhood that prepared him for life beyond the cozy salons and idyllic summer houses of Sweden's grand society. Those around him recognized that Raoul possessed an unusual independence of spirit, a calm and resolute self-confidence, and a deep interest in the world and its people. In 1931, already proficient in German, French, Russian, and English, as well as Swedish, Raoul arrived in Ann Arbor to take up the study of architecture at this university. Now, why Michigan? Why did he choose this place over the great universities of Europe? Because, on the advice of his grandfather, who had been a leading Swedish diplomat, Wallenberg saw that a great public university in the heart of North America could open to him the world and its enormous diversity. Here in Ann Arbor, unencumbered by the reputation of his distinguished family, he was taken as an ordinary student. He quickly made many friends who admired his modesty, his intelligence, and his aptitude for finding practical solutions to seemingly complex problems. Wallenberg's education also took him beyond this campus. He spent his many vacations, in the 3.5 years he was here, he didn't go home, hitchhiking across North America, and he traveled as far as Mexico. He journeyed amid the dislocations of the Great Depression as people gave up home and farm in search of work and traveled with him. But it was here at Michigan and on these vacation travels that he deepened his insight into human needs and motivations. It was in this place and through these travels that he discovered his skills as someone who could nimbly cross the borders of language, social class, culture, and experience. Yet it was through these experiences that Wallenberg voiced a clear-headed recognition of the hard limits to the openness that he sought in the world. In one of the papers he wrote as a student, he noted that the open-mindedness of humanity, even in our generation, is a myth. Maybe the individual is open-minded on one question, but on this question he generally belongs to the minority. In most other things, he generally is extremely reactionary. The Europe to which Wallenberg returned after leaving Ann Arbor confirmed his insight. In a continent beset by growing danger, he entered into business with a partner who was a Hungarian Jew. Wallenberg made frequent trips to Budapest during the 1930s, where, with his characteristic skill with languages, he learned Hungarian. But the outbreak of World War II interrupted his business. In 1944, his life took a new turn when his government accorded Wallenberg the protected status of a diplomat. He was sent as the emissary of a neutral country, and he embarked on an extraordinary final journey, returning to Budapest to try to save one of the few remaining pockets of surviving Jews in Europe. Wallenberg threw himself into his desperate mission with characteristic determination and ingenuity. With a cool-eyed fearlessness and by force of persuasion, personality, and well-chosen moments of intimidation, Wallenberg developed an operation built on artifice and nerve to achieve the impossible. He recruited a band of Jewish volunteers, told them to remove the yellow star that marked them for death, and placed them under his diplomatic protection to shield them from arrest. He designed official-looking documents that extended Sweden's protection to the bearer and had his accomplices distribute these throughout Nazi-occupied Budapest to Jews awaiting deportation. Wallenberg sheltered thousands in buildings that he rented and declared to be under the diplomatic authority and protection of the Swedish government. Through his ingenuity and audacity, Wallenberg saved the lives of at least 20,000 persons. In the last days of the German occupation, he confronted the Nazi commandant who was poised to liquidate the Budapest ghetto, and saved another 70,000 lives. But terribly, within days of the arrival of the Russian army in Budapest, Soviet agents abducted Raoul Wallenberg, and he disappeared into the gulag of Joseph Stalin. The journey he had set for himself out into the world ended in enigma and darkness. Tonight is the 14th occasion for us to remember and to celebrate Raoul Wallenberg's uncommon courage and humanity. Previous recipients of the Wallenberg Medal remind us how valor and dedication to these values find expression in people from all walks of life who face extraordinary challenges. Past recipients of this medal include Elie Wiesel, the Dalai Lama, Jan Karski, a Polish military officer who brought the first word of the Holocaust to the Allies, Miep Gies, who hid the family of Anne Frank in Amsterdam, Helen Suzman, an anti-apartheid activist from South Africa, and John Lewis, a congressman from Georgia who organized the March on Washington back in 1963. And last year we welcomed here Bill Bash, who survived the war in Budapest thanks to the intrepid activities of Raoul Wallenberg himself. From the stories of these remarkable individuals, we are reminded how difficult and important the struggles are for freedom, human dignity, social justice, and peace, and how fragile is, in Wallenberg's words, the open-mindedness of humanity. I am pleased to introduce to you Paul Courant to start this evening. Paul Courant is Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs at the University of Michigan. Provost Courant will introduce to you Heinz Drossel, our honored guest, and present the Wallenberg Medal.
Thank you, John. It is a privilege to be with you all this evening and to join you in conferring the Raoul Wallenberg Medal on Heinz Drossel. And I must say, it is really one of the happy accidents of my life that I have this privilege. For Wallenberg has been a hero of mine since before I can remember, and here I get to hand out a medal in his name. This evening's ceremony is an opportunity for all of us to reflect on the courageous lives of Mr. Wallenberg and the individuals, now numbering 14, who have received the medal named in his honor. His work against the Nazis and their allies to assist Jews has just been discussed in detail by John, so I won't go into it. The University of Michigan is proud of its connection to Raoul Wallenberg, who was a 1935 graduate in the architecture program. I am fortunate to have my faculty office in the building, now called Lorch Hall, for many years called Old Architecture, for many years before that called Architecture, in which he studied and which has a plaque in his honor. We are grateful tonight for the opportunity to recognize the courage and commitment to human dignity that he represented. I am deeply honored to introduce this year's Wallenberg Medal recipient, Heinz Drossel. Mr. Drossel is a remarkable man. He has lived by and acted upon his convictions throughout his life, fully understanding the risks he took in doing so, yet persevering in what he believed was right. I suspect, indeed I'm confident, that Mr. Drossel learned the importance of principled beliefs and actions from his parents, Paul and Elfriede Drossel, individuals who also lived courageously. This family, living in Germany during the Nazi era, demonstrated the difference individual actions can make in the world. Heinz Drossel's life is rich with examples of simple actions that have had a profound impact on others. Trained as a lawyer in 1930s Germany, he refused on principle to join the Nazi Party because he abhorred its ideas. He was immediately drafted into the German army. Here, too, he acted upon his belief in the fundamental value of all human life. His refusal to order the execution of a captured Russian is but one example of his principled behavior in the midst of the chaos of inhumanity and war. There are many others. It's a story of generosity, coupled with that of his parents, that I want to recount briefly here. It's known to some of you, but well worth hearing again. In 1945, the Drossel family offered life-saving protection to Jack and Lucy Haas, their daughter Margot, and her fiancé Ernest Fontheim. They stored the Haas family's belongings and provided immediate shelter and food for the family, Jews in fear for their lives as their identity had been discovered and reported to the German authorities. The Drossels risked severe punishment if their assistance was uncovered, but they believed that the Nazis were wrong and that the brutal persecution and murder of Jews must stop. They did what it is in their power to do, and they saved the lives of the Haas-Fontheim family. That Margot and Ernest Fontheim would eventually settle in Ann Arbor and be part of the University of Michigan community was, of course, unknown in 1945. Heinz Drossel and his parents acted on their belief that each human life has meaning, that each individual has a contribution to make to the world. We can appreciate, through the Fontheims, the importance of that belief. Mr. Drossel, we thank you and we honor you for saving a life, living a life that values our shared humanity and that demonstrates for all of us how important individual actions can be. It is my great privilege to confer upon you the Raoul Wallenberg Medal.
Ladies and gentlemen, I feel deeply moved about the great honor you have shown to me, and I thank you, dear Mr. Godfrey, and all the members of the University Wallenberg Executive Committee to present the Raoul Wallenberg Medal to me, in memory of one of the greatest rescuers whose mission ended so tragically. Hearing about the destiny of Raoul Wallenberg shortly after World War II, I felt a deep harmony with this great man and the feeling some time ago when I could hold Margot's and Ernest's daughter Eve in my arms long time after World War II, and who, as well as her brother and his children, probably never had been born, makes me overjoyed. I also feel a strong desire to express my thankfulness for my mother, my dad, and my grandfather, each of them has been a shining example for a life of dignity of men, not only by talking about, but also by acting, even when they had to make sacrifices and disappointments. In this spirit, the word of my dad in his address to me in the evening of my first Holy Communion is to understand. Be ever a human being in your life, my boy. Also when times are bad, and even if you have to make sacrifices. This word became my guide of life when I was 13. And I hope I have been successful in fulfilling the wish of my dad. The problem of anti-Semitism in Germany has an early history. Unfortunately, the followers of that idea, that odious idea, have a relative great basis in Germany. But this is an analyst. It's not my turn. It is the subject for an historian. My point of view, there is a certain danger also today. My experience is a dictatorship must be prevented to eliminate them having also the power in their hands is quite impossible. Ladies and gentlemen, it is very difficult to imagine a life in a dictatorship for everybody who never has experienced a dictatorship. But you are able to live and also to overlive. It's possible, but you have to pay a high price. You have to sell yourself completely. Your mind, your character, your belief, your soul, and perhaps most important, your personal freedom. I'm sorry. Many of the German people at that time have sold themselves, although they could know what would happen. Shortly before the last free election in 1932, I asked my father, "Dad, which is the right party out of 36 parties?" His answer was, "Go to their meetings, their marching ups, read the papers, inform yourself, my boy." I did so. When hearing the refrain of one of their songs in a Nazi meeting, "And we shall go on marching until the Jews' blood splashes from our knives. My decision against this party was clear. Besides, I have read Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, My Fight, carefully, and was absolutely convinced that at the end of the war, of the rule of the National Socialists would be war. And as a result, I have been an opponent, yes, an enemy of this government already on January 30th, 1933, the day of the taking over of the power by the National Socialists. Exactly 10 days after January 30th, I woke up about 4 o'clock in the morning because of noise in the backyard of the house. I looked out and saw 2 SA men. Let me explain some terms. SA and SS men have been members of the Nazi stormtroops, uniformed and trained in arms, Gestapo, the dread Secret Service. Well, I saw 2 SA men dragging along a young man, rumor in the house, behind them, beating the young man with heavy sticks. They disappeared behind the front door. 2 days later, the father of this young man didn't come back from his job. Both of them have never been seen again. From this day on, 10 days after the 30th of January, people disappeared over and over again forever. Most people did not care for their vanish. The time of concentration camps had begun. Neighbors remained silent or looked away. The further development of dictatorship went very quickly. My father had opened a lingerie shop after World War I, a family business I helped in my free time. One morning, a female customer entered the shop. I myself was present. She was in tears and said to my dad, "Mr. Drossel, yesterday evening my husband didn't come home from his job." Dad calmed her down, saying to her, "Be here tomorrow, madam, if he isn't home." In the afternoon, my father asked in all neighboring hospitals, nothing. Early the next morning, she waited already before the shop was open. "My husband isn't home." I was present again. To tell the truth, I had waited for her. I said spontaneously, "Be quiet, madam. I will try to trace him." I went to the central Berlin police center at the Alexander Square. No result. After leaving the office, I went down a corridor when the office employee, an elder policeman I had spoken with, passed me, whispering, "Go to the second floor if you are courageous, but don't betray me." I did so and stood before a wall of steel bars. A nameplate told me, "Gestapo, Berlin." Instantly, I rang the bell. An SS man led me into an office. Some minutes later, a Gestapo officer came in, gave no attention to me. Suddenly he asked, "Is the man who are looking for a subversive?" Without waiting for an answer, he dazzled me by a very strong light for perhaps half an hour. No word was changed between us. Finally, the officer said to me, "You can go now, but do never return here. It might be you wouldn't come out." In the evening, ladies and gentlemen, the husband of the lady was home. When we saw first time again, he said to me, "Heinz, I thank you. We have not been far away from another that morning." Some weeks later, I told a faithful friend of mine the story. He replied that some weeks ago, he himself had been brought from the same room directly into the cellar of the Berlin Police Center, the most cruel torture cellar in Berlin. He opened his shirt, and I saw his breast studded with scars where the Gestapo men had stubbed out their burning cigarettes during the interrogation. From 1936 to 1938, I studied jurisprudence at the Berlin University with great reservation, for this department was known as the most brown in Germany. Every student had to take part in a 6-week camp for political education. In these camps, students were tuned up to good National Socialists. That meant political education and military training in the spirit of the SS. I myself and some others bought illegal a certificate that we had taken part. The whole atmosphere was brown. But nevertheless, we had a professor, Professor Dovifat. His subject was Adolf Hitler in the international caricature with slides. This lecture had to be transferred to the Auditorium Maximum, the greatest lecture room in the university. And remember the Sister Scholl, the white rose. There was some resistance, but only sporadic. In addition to jurisprudence, I studied Russian language. Don't ask me why. On November 9th, 1938, I think the events of this day are known as Reichskristallnacht. My professor changed the subject of the day, saying, "Today we will speak about arson, a crime they are just training outside." There were people with courage. An attempt of mine to immigrate failed in 1938. My studies ended on November 27th, 1939, with an attribute. Next morning, I met with a friendly reception by the presiding judge. He said, "Mr. Drossel, it's everything all right with you, so we will exempt you from military service still today, and tomorrow you will hear at which court you will start as junior lawyer." Then, seeing a little sticker on my file, he continued, "By the way, in which national organization are you?" I replied, "Sorry, sir, and no one." After this answer, he pushed my file away, saying, "Refused." Next morning, I got my draft, and on next Monday, I marched into the next barracks, instead as junior lawyer, into my court. And this meant a decision for my life. First, I had to take part in war at once. And second, in the case Hitler would have won the war, I had a ban on pursuing my career for the rest of my life. After short training, I took part in the campaign towards France. When crossing the French border, I made a vow never to kill a human being. And I'm very, very grateful that I could keep my promise up to date, several times under risk of my own life. On June 22nd, 1941, the war of aggression towards Russia began. My company leader had shown me, I had been courier, the order for the attack, and I read the sentence, "No prisoners are to be made." In the first battle, I refused this order and helped some Russian soldiers to escape. My company leader ignored my action. On July 9th, 1941, we had a longer stop on the march after we had passed the little Latvian town Dagda. I made, with permission of my officer, a little walk and came to a little hill, surrounded by dense wood. Suddenly, a German soldier stood just before me, staring into a small valley below him. I also looked down and saw on the ground of the valley a mass grave filled with dead men. Around the grave, kneeling, Jewish men, behind them German soldiers. Just below me stood a boy, perhaps 6 years old, reaching for the man beside him, perhaps his father. The soldier behind him gave him a shot in the neck and kicked the child into the grave, down to his murdered fellow believers. In this moment, the soldier before me held his machine gun on my breast, crying, "What are you doing here? Beat it and shut up." When I came weeping back to my comrades, one of them asked me, "Is it true what we are believing?" I only could nod my head. Then we are really soldiers of a killer. 6 days later, we came into heavy fights. After some minutes, 2 of our men came from the front, leading a Russian prisoner with them. I saw at once that was a Russian commissioner. My company leader looked around and said to me, "Bring him to the battalion." I knew that this order meant a sentence to death. The so-called commissioning order, signed by Hitler himself, reads as follows. Every captured commissioner has to be brought to the next higher commander, there to be examined, and afterward, instantly, to be shot dead. I took him with me, let him go before me, hands up. In the first moment we couldn't be observed, I ordered him to go into a small path in the wood, and now I knew why I had learned Russian language. Know that I am not a killer, I am a human being. Then I showed him the way back to the Russian side of the front, saying, "Run away," and "Mir tibie," that means peace with you. But he didn't run immediately, but he came nearer to me, gave me his hand, replying, "Spasibo, mir tibie." I thank you. Peace with you too. After these words, he ran away. This was one of my happy hours in that terribly war. I have never been inquired about the commission. On our further advance, we reached the village Zalesye, half between Moscow and Leningrad. Here we should stay over the winter. Some weeks later, after our arrival, our battalion with 360 men was surrounded by a great number of Russian units. 3 inquiries of my battalion commander to break through backwards were refused by Hitler's headquarters. Then our commander ordered the breakthrough at his own risk. Unfortunately, it was too late. On January 13, 1942, early in the morning, we tried the breakthrough. We had 47 degrees Celsius below. 16 men including my commander and myself, we had been the last to go, came out of the pocket. 344 remained dead in a small valley. As I was knowing the secret path backwards, I got the order to lead these 16 men back to our backward union. I brought them through safely. Next morning, I was called to my commander. He informed me that he had proposed me for officer without my consent. 3 hours later, I had to leave my unit. The whole army with 80,000 soldiers, German soldiers, had been encircled. I left the pocket of Demyansk with the last plane. At the end of May 1942, I was appointed officer and promoted lieutenant. I never had wanted to become officer, but now being one, I quickly learned that it was much easier to help people in many cases in consequence of the old Prussian principle, order is order. Back at the front, I was transferred to a staff of an infantry battalion. In the last days of October 1942, I got my first vacation as officer to Berlin. Before leaving, I had to sign an order which just had come from Berlin headquarters. The order ended with the following words: every connection between an officer and a member of the Jewish race is forbidden. Otherwise, he has to be disgracefully dismissed from the army. And this ended, in most cases, in a concentration camp. I undersigned. On the last day of my vacation, I made a walk to Old Berlin. I loved it, then still existing. On my way back to our Tempelhof apartment, I had to cross a bridge over the river Spree. I chose the so-called Jungfernbrücke, Old Maid Bridge, the last drawbridge in Berlin. On the bridge, a person stood restless at the railing. When seeing my uniform, she got into a panic and tried to jump into the water. I just could seize her. Seeing her excited eyes, I asked it instinctively, "Are you Jewish?" She collapsed. I could calm her down and brought her to our Tempelhof apartment. Next morning, I took off all my bank balance, that were 6,000 mark, and gave it her. With this money, she found another illegal quarters. She survived with her 6-year-old boy. In the evening, I had to return to the front. This was my answer to the order from Berlin headquarters. I was content with myself. 2 very hard years of war followed. From Silesia, 1941 in January, we only marched westward. But I have no intention to tell you war stories. In January 1945, I was in Berlin again after my 4th wound. I stayed with my parents in their little house in a Berlin village near Berlin, the village Senzig. Nearly every evening, we got the visit of 4 persons, a married couple, her daughter. They called themselves Hesse, and a young man to hear the news of British Broadcasting Company. Together, from the Nazi regime forbidden on penalty of death. And thousands of Germans had been killed because of this crime. On my last day home, the 4 persons were present. The elder man asked me to come with them when they started home. They lived in a primitive, broken old summer house, perhaps 150 yards away from my parents' house. Just indoor, he said to me, "We are Jewish people living illegal here, and I've heard this morning that we have been betrayed. The Gestapo can be here every moment. We don't know what to do. Can you help us in some way?" After informing my parents, I gave them the keys of our Tempelhof apartment, some instructions about the way, and how to behave in Tempelhof. Besides, I gave the men a pistol with ammunition and showed them briefly how to handle it. Shortly after, they left in direction to Berlin, arrived safely at the apartment in Tempelhof. The reaction of my parents, my father only said, "Heinz, have you already a plan?" And my mom said to me, "Heinz, I don't know how to live without you, but do what you have to do." I myself observed their house in Senzig. About 1 hour later, 2 men, typically dressed for a Gestapo man, came, searched the house, and left it perhaps 1 hour later. Then I felt it would be high time to disappear myself. I made a short visit to Hesses in Tempelhof, found everything okay, and started again to the front. The young men stayed in Tempelhof until the end of the war, and the 2 women and the elder man soon found another illegal possibility. All of them survived. Back at the front, I got immediately the order to fight again against advancing Russian troops, together with 80 men of my unit. On May 4th, 1945, that means 4 days before the German capitulation, an SS officer gave me the order to go with my 80 men on a suicide mission. I refused the order. When he threatened, he let his men shoot at us, I ordered my men to open fire against the SS. My men obeyed. But shortly after, I gave up. For the SS was armed with most modern weapons, and my men only had some old guns. I was taken to court and sentenced to death by order of a court-martial, but the verdict could not be executed because meanwhile Russian troops had taken the village, and in this way I had been saved from execution and simultaneously taken prisoner of war. The Russian troops released me in August 1945. I soon contacted my friends who had got an apartment in Tempelhof, not far away from the shop of my father, whose shop had been closed for political reasons. I often visited them. One evening at the end of 1945, I entered the living room of the then family Haas, and who was standing before me? The woman of the old maid bridge. She had survived with her then 10-year-old son. We embraced at once and married on my day of destiny on May 4th, 1946. And the family Haas became the witnesses of our marriage. My wife has survived the Shoah, and we still had 35 good years together. She passed away in 1981. And ladies and gentlemen, if you ask, why did you as you did? I thought it over ever and ever again. And I think there are three reasons. There were shining examples in my own family for dignity of man, a strong human spirit, and a good faith. Finally, I myself was not ready to live in an inhuman dictatorship, and therefore I had decided, in the case of a German victory, to die myself. And if you ask, why did so many look away? In many cases, yeah, I believe I can say in most cases, there had been fear to lose their career, but not to be promoted at the first opportunity. Only 2 hours I saw the movie Der Untergang. I had feared that Hitler would be shown as a pituitary old man, but that was not the case. I think the very good actor has shown him correctly. But remarkable for me, the officers around him remained good Nazis. They went out with this Faschisten greet, Heil mein Führer. Only hours before the end of the Führer, their hypocrisy, their submissive cowardice. I am convinced that this description was true. There were exceptions also among the officers, but those officers, long before, had been eliminated. The house, the cinema, was full. The auditorium predominating young people. When the movie was over, there were groups in the street discussing the movie, the time of National Socialism, and many of them went home very thoughtfully. The same impression during my speeches. Since the year 2000, I had begun to speak about the time of National Socialism in schools, before people, communities. I think there is hope. But it's a very, very great task. Look around. Children are weeping for hunger in the world, for abuse, for child labor, and worst of all, children be trained for war. Disdain of dignity of man. Not only far away, ladies and gentlemen, but all over the world. And in this case, it's for each of us to act. I do appreciate the efforts of many young Germans today to work against hate and inhumanity. I believe this is a good way for international understanding. I myself had an American pen friend here in the United States when I was 13, and I still have contact with the brother of my then girlfriend, in spite of war and National Socialism. Youth must be brought to youth, and each of us must be engaged in this task, women and men. It is still a little flame burning. We need many more women and men like Raoul Wallenberg. And the hope that time will come that everybody will realize that peace will be the greatest chance for each of themselves. I'm aware that this is still a dream, but without dreams, there will be no progress in the world. Humanity is a way to peace. I thank you.
I think we have time for perhaps a very few questions and answers. But I'd like Ernst Fontheim, Emeritus Faculty from the Department of Atmospheric, Oceanic, and Space Sciences, to join us on stage to help his good friend, Heinz Drossel, to answer these questions. Ernst, can you come up? Do we have a microphone in the audience? I'm not sure if we do. We don't. So if anyone has a question for Mr. Drossel or for Professor Fontheim, you may ask it, and I'll repeat it so we can all hear it. Yes.
Did you ever see any other German officers who tried to save other people? Ich habe andere deutsche Offiziere gesehen, die versucht haben, Jugendliche andere Leute zu retten.
Yes. No, I didn't make this experience, but there were some, but only very little part of the German officers. We had thousands of officers in the German army, but the number of known officers who tried to help or save victims or persecuted has been very, very little. Among the thousands of German officers, 10,000 of them are known, perhaps 100, acting in this direction. Many, I think some of them wanted to help, but, how I said, the order is order, hindered them to do that. What means my own life, I am convinced up today that my company leader, when I saved Russian soldiers, and when I let go the Russian commissioner, wanted the Russian commissar, I am convinced he wanted to do something. I saw him when the prisoners stand around him. Sit on shaking. Trembling. But he hadn't the courage to stay to his character. And I think, in the case of the commissar, he chose me to act instead of him. But also this were only a little number.
I think we can take just one more question if anyone has a question. Yes, I can. Please.
Wie ist die Nazi-Regierung beschrieben in deutschen Schulen heute?
The question is how the Nazi regime is being portrayed in German public schools today.
Ja, wie die Nazi-Regierung in deutschen Schulen beschrieben, behandelt wird.
Was heißt Schweigen?
Silence. Silence.
Yeah. During in the last 50 years, between the end of the war and perhaps 1990, there were silence. Let me say, total silence about every question about Holocaust, about cruelties, and the Wehrmacht, the military service. In the beginning of the last years of the last century, 1990 perhaps, they began to teach about this cruel time, but only sporadic and in a very short way. Today it has been better, but it is still too small, too little. Still today, many German pupils, students, didn't know anything about that cruel time. Is your question answered? That depends very strong from the teachers. And I have spoken, meanwhile, before about 5,000, more than 5,000 students at high schools, and I found a great interest among the young men and women to hear about those things, and I ever and ever again become letters, emails, asking me more about this time.
Could you take one more question? Would you like to take one more question? There's one more question from the audience.
Yeah.
Can you? Okay.
Yeah.
There's a question here. Yes.
Hast du jemals den Kommissar noch mal wieder getroffen?
No,
The question is whether he ever met the Kommissar again.
he disappeared forever for me.
Thank you very much. And I'll conclude and we'll go up to the lobby. Thank you. I'd like to thank you and thank Mr. Drossel for sharing his story and thoughts with us this evening. Again, I am pleased to chair a truly dynamic and dedicated group of individuals, the Wallenberg Committee, which has provided the energy and the organizational imagination to make this annual event one of the most important of the university's calendar. One way to learn about Raoul Wallenberg and his Michigan experience and to learn about other recipients of the Wallenberg Medal is to read the book, Remembering Raoul Wallenberg, and I believe we have it available for purchase in the lobby this evening. I have been asked to read one announcement, and I'm pleased to do so. The University of Michigan's Conference on the Holocaust is going to hold a Kristallnacht commemoration on Tuesday, November 9th at 7 p.m. in the League's Vandenberg Room. The event will comprise a panel of scholars who will discuss the topic of state-sanctioned violations of human rights, and the entire University of Michigan and Ann Arbor community is welcome to attend. Now, thank you very much, and I invite you to please join us in the lobby for a reception in honor of Mr. Drossel. Thank you.